obviously we know Gonzaga Saint Mary's have been 1-2 in this conference for what seems like the last 20 years. And since 2009, no one other than St. Mary's or Gonzaga have won a regular season title or a tournament title. This conference has belonged to those two. St. Mary's is the only one who has consistently been able to challenge Gonzaga for those championships. Hey everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer, and this week I think that this is going to be a pretty self-explanatory episode. We're going to be talking a lot about St. Mary's and Gonzaga. They face each other for the first time this Saturday in Moraga, so we'll talk a lot about that. We're going to bring on Andy Patton from Locked On Zags podcast so we can talk about the rivalry and everything that kind of goes into that, and then we'll go into the matchup and everything else. And then we're also going to talk with former St. Mary's forward Beau Levesque. You might remember him from he was on the St. Mary's team from 2009 to 2014. So it'll be great to catch up with Beau and kind of get his perspective of the rivalry and all of that. And we're going to dive deep into just the rivalry and what the matchup is going to look like this coming Saturday. And we still got a lot of great matchups otherwise, and we'll get into those on the back half of the episode. But we're going to start with my big three of the week. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the BYU St. Mary's game on Saturday. And this one going in, it was a 6.5 point spread going into that matchup. And I honestly thought that was probably going to be a little bit low going in. This was a St. Mary's defense that was obviously it's a top 10 defense in the country. And BYU has an offense down in the 180s. So I thought this was kind of a little bit of a mismatch on that front. But that ended up not being the case. And actually even more so, like before I get into that, also just hours before the game was to start, we got news that Jackson Robinson, Atiki Aliatiki, and Noah Waterman were going to be unavailable for the game. Because they were suspended for violating a team rule, so we weren't going to see them either. And with now missing like 3 of their top 8 in the rotation, I was really kind of double downing on like, well, this has got to be a double digit game now. Like I don't see how BYU hangs around in this one, but BYU did. The Cougars really hung around in this game, and every time it seemed St. Mary's was able to make a run, BYU answered. Every time St. Mary's looked like they might have started to separate themselves, BYU came right back. And this was a great game for Dallin Hall. Like this was probably one of his more complete performances of the year. And obviously we know like this is something that has been growing and growing. Dallin Hall has gotten better throughout the course of the year. And he was great down the stretch. Spencer Johnson hit a couple of threes down the stretch that even gave BYU a late lead in that contest. But really, it's crazy to think that it almost seems on a regular basis we continue to talk about and have to talk about Aiden Mahaney. Mahaney hit an incredible shot, a turnaround jumper to give the Gaels the lead with 0.3 left, ended up being the game-winning shot. It just seems that every time this St. Mary's team needs a bucket, needs something to go their way, it's give the ball to Mahaney and let him go. It's really been incredible just the number of times it seems Aiden Mahaney is coming through for this team. And I saw a few people starting to tweet about it over the weekend that we might actually have to really consider Aiden Mahaney in the player of the year conversation now, not let alone him being on the first team, which I think at this stage seems like a lock for Mahaney as a freshman. But just his composure throughout the course of the season is maybe the most impressive thing that you could really take from his game, because there's always going to be off nights, on nights from from freshmen, but just he seems to be so consistent night in, night out, so composed, and he is clearly turning into a leader on this team when he's surrounded by other leaders. When you have the Alex Ducases, Kyle Bowens, the Logan Johnsons, like you have a lot of good leaders on this team. And what Ada Mahaney is doing is just adding another layer to this group. And I said it before the season, and it still remains to be true, that I thought this team was going to be a second weekend team. And there's second weekend in the NCAA tournament, and I don't see any reason why they're still not on pace to be that. I mean, matchups obviously are going to always depend upon that, but I mean, hey, they're 19-4 right now. I think this is just going to be one of the more. I think this is going to be maybe the best St. Mary's team. This might be the best St. Mary's team actually we've seen, at least like the way they're going to put themselves in position in the tournament, and then how far they go in. And looking back at what BYU has done, so BYU with the loss drops to 4-5. They're still right there in smack in the middle of the conference race. I think right now they're about 5th or 6th in the standings. What has to be frustrating for BYU fans is the fact that every last one of these games have been close. They could have won the St. Mary's game. They could have won and should have won the Gonzaga game. They should have actually. They've had opportunities to win almost every single one of these games. They have those 5 combined losses. Those 5 losses are by a combined 21 points. This is just, and none of them have been by double digits. These have all been single digit games that BYU has been in, and it's almost just lost opportunity after lost opportunity, and not being able to close the deal against good and mediocre teams. So it's not just the Gonzaga Saint Mary's, which BYU has played very well against both, but it's everybody else as well. It's like they let the game against USF get away from them a bit. They couldn't actually shut the door or get the buckets they needed against Santa Clara. So this BYU team they're not that far away from being one of the top 3 teams in the league. I mean, again, like a basket here or there, and this is a 6-3 team instead of a 4-5 team. So the margin for error is just so small for BYU, and that's what's really hurt them, is just the little things uh, that have just gone wrong for them. And if they can clean up at least a little bit of this, I think we're going to see BYU is still going to be in the mix. They're going to be dangerous in Vegas, so I'm just going to leave it at that, because you can't, even if they don't have the results, BYU, you can't forget about them. All right, my number 2 for the week, from the past week. This one is Pacific, and they went out and got a really good win at Santa Clara, and this is a bad loss for Santa Clara. This is a game that obviously is not going to look good for a resume or anything like that. But at this stage, Santa Clara is now just hoping that they can get back into the NIT conversation. They do have to go up to Gonzaga this week, so that will be a big opportunity for them. And again, we've already seen that Gonzaga is vulnerable at times, especially against teams who have elite scorers like Santa Clara does. Pajemski had 38 against Pacific, but that was still just not enough. What I think is really impressive about Pacific is that they are taking their act on the road and playing well. This is a team that is 7-3 on the road this year, which sounds incredible and sounds completely off when you look at their home record being 4-9. Like, this Pacific team is doing it the opposite way of what you would expect. And they drilled 17 threes on Saturday, which is just nuts. Kalen Boone had a great night, 27 points for him on 10 of 14 from the field. They're tied for fourth in the WCC right now with Santa Clara, and you know Pacific's in position to not have to play in that opening round right now. Like Pacific is now has an opportunity to end up with a bye for Vegas, and that is not something any of us would have actually thought we would say about this Tiger team. I think it says a lot about just the resolve that this team has. I think it says a lot about what Leonard Perry has been able to do with the roster he's had, with the guys he's brought in. This Pacific team is gritty. They don't back down, and yeah, they're not the most talented, but they're getting the most out of it right now. And so it'll be interesting to see. I mean, how the rest of conference play goes for them. But yeah, just like hats off to Pacific. They've had a really good first half of conference play, 4-4. So we'll just see how it goes. And then lastly, on my big three is USF. USF has won 3 in a row now, and it does look like that they've. I think first off, like their schedule got a little easier. They did have to see Saint Mary's and Gonzaga and Santa Clara all within those first few games, which is what happened, and was it looked like a disaster uh, for the Dons. But again, 3 straight wins now, and they're shooting in that stretch, shooting 48% from 3, and they're hitting an average of 12 per game. So they're starting to come around, and this is again this is how they are built. Like they are so into the analytics of it, and this is something that we've seen USF do for the last few years. Is they've been so reliant upon 3, and right now they are shooting well, and it's to their benefit. They've beaten Pacific, they've beaten BYU, they beat San Diego. Now San Diego's not a good defensive team by any stretch, but again, like we just talked about Pacific um, a little bit and how well they've been playing. They went out and were able to take care of Pacific. They were able to take down BYU. They handled their business against San Diego. So the USF is climbing back into this race again. They've won 3 in a row. They're at 4-5 right now, so they're slowly climbing back into this at the midpoint of conference play. Long way to go, but USF starting to play the part that we thought they were going to earlier on in conference play. All right, so with that, we're going to get into Gonzaga and Saint Mary's. And again, game is this Saturday night, 7 o'clock in Moraga at University Credit Union Pavilion on ESPN. And it's always interesting to kind of think about this. Obviously, we know Gonzaga St. Mary's have been 1-2 in this conference for what seems like the last 20 years. And since 2009, no one other than St. Mary's or Gonzaga have won a regular season title or a tournament title. This conference has belonged to those two. St. Mary's is the only one who has consistently been able to challenge Gonzaga for those championships. BYU, for all of the talk that we heard when they came into the conference, now with them leaving, that was something they were never able to claim. There was always Gonzaga or St. Mary's. Even if St. Mary's had an off year, it was like BYU could not fully like displace St. Mary's as as the other team who could really actually challenge Gonzaga. And there's so many. This is going to be just so fascinating because this is again a difference of styles. Gonzaga being one of the best offensive teams in the country, St. Mary's being one of the best defensive teams in the country. But even over the last few years, what we have seen is that even when Gonzaga wins, they're largely playing at the pace St. Mary's wants to play. Randy Bennett has kind of imposed his will on pace on the Zags. We saw that in the matchup down. We saw that in the matchup in Moraga last year, where St. Mary's was able to get the win. We saw that in the two matchup, the one in Spokane and in the one in Vegas, that like these were lower scoring games, at least lower scoring for the Zags, and it really gets slowed down, dragged out. And St. Mary's is one of the teams that has played Drew Timme at least fairly well in the last year. Drew Timme, like year one of Drew Timme, was an absolute monster, and St. Mary's had no answer for him. But we started to see that they were they had a game plan, that there was some level of making it more difficult on Timme. And again, we could talk like the matchup there. Like that's going to be Kyle Bowen's uh, pull. Like that's going to be his assignment for that game. And we know that Kyle Bowen is like one of the best defenders, if not the best defender in the conference. Mitchell Saxon will get his turns on Timme as well. This is going to be really interesting, just to see how St. Mary's mixes and matches the looks on Timme. Oh, and again, also we're also coming off a game where Julian Strother drops 40. So we're getting also just some of the other players for the Zags who have caught fire of late. We haven't seen it consistently. I think that's still the thing for guys like Strother, for guys like Bolton, for guys like Hickman, Salas, like the consistency on a night in night out basis, and we haven't seen that quite yet from the rest of the roster. And that's the unusual part to this. That's what makes this game that's going to be so fascinating about this. Over the last few weeks, we can kind of point to all of the near the near disasters, the near misses, the near losses for Gonzaga, USF, Santa Clara, BYU. They did lose to LMU. It's like we can, and how St. Mary's on the flip side had just dominated a lot of those matchups. Last time they saw Santa Clara by double digits, they beat USF by 14 or 17. They now BYU was the one that was actually identical. It was like a 1 point win with a last sec with a game winner in the last few seconds of the game for both Gonzaga and for St. Mary's. This has been the class of the conference for the last 2 decades, and there's this is always to me, and maybe like this is the my St. Mary's bias, my St. Mary's alum card being pulled of this is always the best game in the WCC. These are two coaches who've basically been through everything along the line with each other. We know Mark Few's resume and everything else. Randy Bennett has been right behind him in all of that. If there's no Mark Few in the WCC, we'd probably be talking about Randy Bennett in very similar fashion that we do talk about Mark Few. That and also now going into this week, Randy Bennett's at 499 career wins. He has the opportunity to get number 500 this week, whether that be with the 2 games at home against USF and then Gonzaga. That's also on the docket for something that could happen this week, and it will be will be done in Moraga. I think it's going to get done on Thursday, but the Saturday game, it turns into a huge party at St. Mary's, as it also does up in Spokane, and we'll see. So one of the two things, again, we're going to bring in a couple of people just to talk about this. So we're going to bring in Andy Patton in a little bit to talk about the matchup and just maybe some of like the historical like villains of this rivalry. And there's a number of Zags I could point to as being like some of those. I mean, we'll talk about like there's the Josh Heifelds, the Adam Morrisons, Robert Sacre. Uh, we bring up Matt Bolden and some of the just up and down the list of Zags who have just been absolute killers to the Gaels over the years. And the same will go for number of Gaels who have been a thorn in the Zag side. And we'll talk to Andy about that and get that Zag perspective on that. Before we do though, we're gonna talk to one of my favorite Gaels from the Randy Bennett era, and this is one of the guys who always kind of like flew under the radar, but did all the little things right. We're going to talk with Beau Levesque, St. Mary's guard from St. Mary's forward from 2009 to 14. So let's get into it with him, and we'll get his perspective on how he looked at the Zags Gaels rivalry over those years. All right, I'm going to bring in Beau Levesque. He was one of the St. Mary's forwards from 2009 to 2014, and he knows this Gonzaga St. Mary's rivalry really well. Beau, how's it going? How you been? And we got a really exciting game matchup. The Zags and Gaels reunite once again.
Yeah, doing well. I'm, fresh off of a couple Clips wins and a nice Aiden Mahaney game winner against BYU. So, doing good. Yeah, excited to talk a little bit of St. Mary's hoops.
Yeah, and all right, you're part of one of the more successful runs for the program, especially against the Zags. I think you got at one stretch you had won 4 times in 7 games. What's something that always kind of stood out in those matchups with the Zags, and what's kind of like in the lasting memory when you think about those games?
So I didn't know too much about the rivalry when I got to St. Mary's, but then I was kind of thrown into it. I was a walk-on freshman, but that was my freshman year. We beat Gonzaga in the championship game in Vegas. Omar Samhan, Mickey McConnell, that crew went crazy, and we upset them and ended up making the tournament where we probably wouldn't have without that win. And
Yeah.
I mean, I remember being in Vegas and just like the vitriol from other fans, like the Gonzaga fans for St. Mary's, and kind of the flip side too. That kind of threw me into the fire as far as like what that rivalry consisted of. And then you look at the next year, and Mickey McConnell hits a game winner over Robert Sacre in Gonzaga to win in Gonzaga. Bennett's first time ever winning there, and then the rivalry just kind of spiraled from there.
And again, like you kind of mentioned, like you kind of got thrown into it. You weren't that familiar. Did you see a St. Mary's Gonzaga game? I mean, you grew up down the street essentially from St. Mary's. Like, what did you get a chance to experience it beforehand, or was like that like when you got there was like really the first time?
Funny because I used to go to St. Mary's games, both male and female, as a kid, just because my dad would take our CYO teams and my sister's CYO teams to St. Mary's games. But they tended to be USD St. Mary's games because my played at University of San Diego. And so I don't know if I ever went to a St. Mary's Gonzaga game, probably because the tickets were a little bit more expensive and, a little bit tougher to get 10 of them for those ones. But so I didn't experience the rivalry until I was playing there.
And so one of the things is obviously like when it's Zags and Gaels, like McEwen really rocks. It's obviously one of the better environments in college basketball. Same up at the Kennel. We'll just kind of talk about just the contrast between when these two teams get together, what it's like in McEwen, but then also up at the Kennel.
Yes, I mean at home. First off, we'll touch on that one. It's just the difference when you got students waiting in line for 24 hours to get tickets. And then normally you get there and you're doing your warm up. I forget exactly how long before the game. And there's probably 12 students in the stands at the start normally. But before the game, they're rushing in there to get first row seats behind, Sean Farnham. And they're just kind of, they're packing the place out with like 90 minutes to 2 hours before the game. So you feel the electricity from the jump. But yeah, there's nothing like it, especially like there's been some crazy environments. I remember a couple BYU games at home that were pretty crazy, but just nothing better than playing Gonzaga. And I remember we beat them at home in 2012 or the 2011-2012 season, and that's still one of my favorite memories. But as far as going up to the Kennel, talk about college basketball environments, it's starting to get a little bit of praise now for how big of an environment it is up there. But when it gets compared to like all these high major programs, like I don't think there's a harder place to play in college basketball than the Kennel. The students are on the floor. They got these, the bleachers that are made out of metal that are attached to the floor, so that when they start jumping, when they're during free throws and stuff, you're sitting on the free throw line, the court is shaking. So they're there from 2 hours before the tip, talking to you during warm-ups. So yeah, those are some of the craziest experiences of my life. I actually didn't get to win in the Kennel. I was redshirting the year that Mickey McConnell hit that game winner. So unfortunately, I was never personally successful there, but I didn't. It just speaks to how hard of a place it is to play.
I mean, it really is. I mean, we see just how successful Gonzaga is year in, year out in that building. So we all know how difficult it is in there. You got to face up with some of a number of really good guys out of Gonzaga. Who was maybe one of the tougher matchups that you had like a primary defender on?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, you have the Elias Harrises, the Kelly Oleniks, the Sam Dowers. But the one that was always gave me fits, especially my senior year, was this guy named Angel Nunez, who didn't end up like averaging that many points. And it's funny, when I was in Brooklyn, he actually was on the Long Island Nets G League team.
Oh yeah,
We caught up a little bit, and that was always just kind of an under the radar, really, really tough matchup. Just someone who was like very athletic, hard to get around, and then also like hard to defend. But obviously, it's hard to beat Kelly Olynyk, who was like consensus All American and one of the best players to ever go through Gonzaga, still playing in the NBA. So he was obviously a matchup that was just, he was too fast for most of our bigs and too big for most of our wings, right? That's why he was so successful in college and why he's still in the NBA. So he's probably the best player. But
mm-hmm.
I'll never forget just my freshman year, and it was Elias Harris, and I'm watching this guy. He was a freshman as well out of Germany, and I was like, this guy's just a different level athlete than anything I've been used to facing. So, and thankfully for me, at that time, I was a walk-on freshman, not getting too many, so I didn't bump against him much. But he was a special player as well.
And one of the things, like, kind of talked about Gonzaga, so we'll turn it back, focus on St. Mary's a little bit more. Like, this team has just continued to evolve since the time that you were at St. Mary's, and it just seems that like Coach Bennett has kind of figured out, like, I mean, he's kind of almost reinvented the way this team runs over the last few years. I mean, you guys were such like an offensive first, like up and down team, and now this team is so defensive heavy, one of the best defensive teams in the country. Kind of talk about just the culture that Randy kind of has built at St. Mary's, and obviously because like you were on like in phase 2 of building the program, how just talk about like how he's kind of built that, and just the fact that, I mean, and so many of you guys come back year in, year out to continue to be part of it.
Yeah. So from a culture standpoint, obviously Bennett is the straw that stirs the drink. He's been there for, a lot of years now, and he's that level of consistency has been what keeps bringing people back. We have these all-star weekends, alumni weekends every third year, basically, and the turnout for those is incredible. Like, we have an alumni game that has about like 25, 30 players in it, and an all-star game at the end that's got about 25 or 30. So I don't think there's a lot of programs in the country that get that level of turnout, and that's just the people playing, let alone the other alumni that come to watch. And so I don't know if there's that many programs that get that level of turnout for something like that, and that just speaks to the program that Bennett's built and the level of consistency he's built throughout his 20-year tenure there. And another thing that goes with his level of consistency and the culture is the assistants that he's hired. I mean, those guys. I mean, from my freshman year, we had Kyle Smith, obviously head coach of Washington State, David Patrick, head coach of Sac State. We had Mark Campbell, who's the head coach of Sac State women's team. And then the next crew came in, and it was Rick Croy, head coach at Cal Baptist. Adam Caporn, who's now working with the Brooklyn Nets, who was the head coach of the Center of Excellence. Aron Ganot, head coach at Hawaii. Marty Clark comes in when those guys, just the level of coaching that we had was just, and Bennett at the top, but then those assistants like down the line. There's no secret sauce, right? Like, those guys put tons of work in. Bennett has the way that he wants to run the program. He believes in it, and it works. And he's gotten great players that fit his mold. We got the Australian players, obviously, and then we got some local guys as well. And he's built something great, and it's continued to do so. And it's kind of like the last of a dying breed in the college basketball scheme, where you look at their team now, and obviously we have Aiden Mahaney, who's one of our better players, but then you have Dukas, who's a 4th-year, 5th-year player. You have Mitchell Saxon, who's getting better every year. You have all these guys who, programs aren't built on guys that stay nowadays, and St. Mary's is and has been, and it's kind of one of the reasons I think it's so special.
And bringing this up, like, Randy will be picking up win number 500 some point in the next week or so, couple weeks. He's at 499 now. And I was looking at it, he's going to be one of only 30 coaches all time to have 500 wins at a single school, which is obviously kind of like to talk to the point of like that the guys stay put, they know about the culture. And I think that, I mean, it says so much about just like Randy, because we know like there's been a lot of opportunities for him to go elsewhere and have those opportunities, but he's been so successful and built it at St. Mary's his way and been able to do that. When you and I always think about just like even like the players who have ended up on the coaching staff. We talk about like all the other guys who've come in, but like current staff has what? Like you have Mickey McConnell on the staff, you have Joe Rahan on the staff, you have Dan Sheets on the staff. Wayne Hunter was on the staff up until this past year. Just, I mean, it also kind of speaks to me of like St. Mary's is known as like, I guess like a lot of it is based on like we produce a lot of teachers and everything else. And the basketball program is almost kind of a pure example of that. You have so many coaches that have come out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of just speaks to the level of IQ and the level of like just players that Bennett recruits, and he knows that it takes. I mean, I can't speak to his thought process, but just with the level of I mean, Delly's still playing in the NBA, but that's one of the smartest basketball minds around, and there's guys like that. I mean, Bennett he recruits smart players because it takes a smart player to play in his system and to understand, the way that we want to be successful there at St. Mary's. And so it's no surprise that at the college ranks, the NBA ranks, like I'm currently, myself, Garrett Jackson, one of our managers, Tharian Williams, he's working for the Sioux Falls G League team. So Garrett Jackson's with the Boston Celtics running their development program. So there's been a lot of coaches, whether it's, in college and then also in the NBA that through St. Mary's. And I think it just speaks to the level of, player that, and the type of player that Bennett recruits.
Yeah. Talk about that as that little fraternity of Gaels in the NBA, and just like how, like when you get a chance, like what is kind of like some of like the conversations you have with the guys? Because obviously like there's what, maybe about of a group of between the coaches and players about 10, 15 of you guys in the league. Is that about the kind of the right number, or like
little lower? Just because we
okay.
guys playing, and then if you include like Jordan Ford, Malik Fitz playing in the G League, then I think we can get up to probably closer to 10.
Okay.
But with Delly, Patty, Jock, myself, Adam Caporn, Garrett Jackson, Tharian Williams, I hope I'm not missing anybody. But we have a nice little crew for a mid major, and we joke with I have Duke Duke alumni on staff, former players and stuff, and we joke sometimes that we're trying to catch them, but that's a pretty big NBA contingent there.
Hey, and I mean like hey I think there were a number of years where like, hey, like Duke is just ducking us. Like they didn't want to actually see us those couple of years. So I think there's always something to kind of like razz them about that and say, hey, you didn't want to play us. Like we were open to it.
I know we had the chance in 2016 or 2010 when we went to the Sweet 16. We lost to Baylor that year, and
yeah,
that would have been Duke in the Elite Eight. But not a lot of people wanted to come to McKeown to play the Gaels.
Still seems to be the case. I guess we got a lot more neutral site games to kind of like take care of that one.
But I'll tell you what, the best non-conference. I mean, you see like why at 19-4 the Gaels are still ranked 18th. It's just because the strength of schedule in that non-conference was impressive. The Houston game, the San Diego State game, so that was awesome.
I don't know how much of Gonzaga you've seen so far this year, but like what's your kind of read on the matchup for Saturday and between St. Mary's and Gonzaga being in Moraga? I mean, St. Mary's obviously is on a roll right now. Gonzaga seems like they're struggling a little bit like on the defensive end. So what's kind of your read if you've been able to kind of watch them?
Yeah, I haven't watched Gonzaga as much. I try and tune into as many St. Mary's games as possible. Alex Jensen on the mic when he's working for WCC Sports. So I try and watch as much St. Mary's, and I can speak to that talent level. But as far as a matchups perspective, I haven't watched. I spend too much time watching NBA film that I have to break away a little bit to mix in some St. Mary's. Like I was watching the BYU game on our flight from Atlanta to Cleveland on a back-to-back, but I haven't been able to tune into Gonzaga too much. But it's going to be hard it's always hard to beat them. They're always good. Mark Few does an incredible job bringing talent in there, and they play super well, and they run a great system. So it's never easy, even if people are talking about St. Mary's potentially being the more talented team this year. And I know Gonzaga lost a tough one to LMU, but that's never an easy win. Just like St. Mary's, projected to be a little bit better than BYU this year, and that's never an easy win. You could see it. They needed a little Mahaney miracle to pull that out over in. So.
Did you get how excited did you get on the plane when Mahaney hit that shot?
Oh, very, yeah. Let out a couple expletives and went screaming up and down the aisles a little bit, and people let's just say that the rest of the staff isn't as locked in on St. Mary's basketball as I am, so they didn't necessarily know what I was talking about, but I was pretty excited.
All right. All right, I'll let you get going, Beau. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for talking some St. Mary's basketball, and we'll be sure to catch up down the road.
All right, Zach, thank you so much.
I mean, this matchup between St. Mary's and Gonzaga is one of the most fun of the college basketball season. And these are two teams that split the two regular season matchups a year ago. You have a lot of the same pieces still on the rosters. You do bring back the likes of Bolton and Strother and Timmy and Salas and Hickman on the Gonzaga side, and then on the St. Mary's side, you have still Logan Johnson, who had a great game last year in Moraga. You have Mitchell Saxon, who played a key role in that game. Remember that Matthias Toss got in early foul trouble in that matchup, and it was Saxon who came in and was able to be that defensive stopper against Chet Holmgren. We know Kyle Bowen hit a couple of critical threes in that one. We know Alex Dukas has been a part of this the entire time. So there's a number of guys on both sides who have long histories, a lot like Beau, who have gone through the ups and downs of this rivalry. And it'll just be really fun to kind of look at that and see where this is going to go. And as we start to get a little bit more into this and dive into it, let's go ahead and get Andy on so that he and I can really kind of dive into what the more specifics about what we should expect on Saturday. All right. It's always great to get Andy Patton on. He's the host for Locked On College Basketball and, of course, Locked On Zags. You can find him on any of the streaming services you follow. Andy, how's it going? And are you as excited as I am for Zags Gaels this week?
Heck yeah, man. Absolutely. Got the Zags Defend the Kennel shirt, rocking it right now. Zach, I am so excited for Gaels week. It is always fun. And this year, it's extra fun because there's a lot on the line right now.
Right. And these two teams, they're now, both of them are in the top 20. The Zags coming in number 12, St. Mary's at 18. Mm-hmm. There's a lot to kind of unpack here. I mean, Gonzaga, as we know, has kind of but not been able to really separate themselves all too much from the rest of the pack. They've had some really competitive games, even this past Saturday at Portland. You get an amazing night from Julian Strother, but Portland was hanging in there at least for the first 30 minutes of that game. And then St. Mary's on the flip side, 10 in a row. They're really starting to cement themselves as one of the better teams in the country. They did escape from BYU, much like the Zags did just a couple of weeks ago. Just your first thought of examining, what do you expect to see on Saturday between these two?
Yeah, the story for Gonzaga St. Mary's games has always kind of been the torrid pace that Gonzaga plays at compared to the, let's say, not torrid pace that St. Mary's plays at. And what I think this game is going to ultimately come down to is who dictates that pace. If Gonzaga allows St. Mary's to dictate the pace, if they don't put a ton of pressure on the young guards or any of the guards, if they let St. Mary's, play their methodical 27, 28, 29 seconds off the shot clock type of pace, I think that that's a tremendous disadvantage for Gonzaga. And unfortunately, what we have seen, unfortunately for me, not necessarily unfortunately for you, is that Gonzaga has kind of played a lot of reactionary basketball this year, where they're kind of letting other teams dictate the speed, the pace, the tempo, all of that stuff. And that's unusual for Gonzaga. You look at their 2020-21 team, and they ran through everybody and they did whatever the heck they wanted, and other teams had to adjust or they would lose. And that doesn't seem to be the case with Gonzaga this year. And Bennett is one of the few coaches in the country who has consistently figured out how to slow Gonzaga down. This year, we've seen a lot more teams be willing and able to do that. And you combine that with the fact that this is arguably one of, if not the best St. Mary's team that Randy has had in a really long time. And you can see how this could be problematic for the Zags. But at the same time, if Gonzaga does get out there, they can figure out how to get out in transition. They can kind of get St. Mary's out of their rhythm. This is a team that beat Alabama. This is a team that beat Michigan State. This is a team that beat Xavier. They're more than capable of beating a very, very good St. Mary's team. But I think it's ultimately really going to kind of come down to that kind of pace conversation.
Right. as you pointed out, like Randy's one of the best at actually getting teams to play his pace, which, as we know, is one of the slowest in the country. And I think the last few times that these two have matched up, it really has been more of a St. Mary's pace, even though the Zags have still come out on top 2 out of 3 last year. But really, it's because I think for the Zags, it really does. It also seems like they need to find the number 2, like, because we know Drew Timmy's going to be able to kind of get what he's going to get. I mean, even though he actually did struggle in the last time in Moraga, that was actually maybe one of his worst games of his career. I don't expect that to happen. Won't see that again. But there has to be that number 2. And Strother, coming off the 40.9, but it feels like so often we see like he'll have that night and then he'll just vanish the next. And same thing with Hickman and the others. What are you kind of seeing from this team and maybe it kind of like continues on through the Santa Clara game? You can't dismiss the fact that they see a Santa Clara in between the two. What are you seeing from this team right now that would kind of put you in the right mind of like Gonzaga is going to pull this one out?
Yeah, I think the Strother game against Portland is helpful. And I'm curious what we see against Santa Clara, because like you said, I think a lot of people might think, oh, well, he's back. He turned the corner. He's ready to go. And like, I feel like it's very possible that he has another disappearing act against Santa Clara on Thursday, because that's kind of been what we've seen from him all year long. And I think ultimately part of the issue for Gonzaga is some tentativeness by the players not named Drew Timme, tentativeness in terms of knowing their role, knowing when they can kind of attack the basket or when they should just defer and give the ball to Drew. And in terms of how they can defeat St. Mary's, I think having shooters step up. Mitchell Saxon is a very good player. He's a very good low post defender. If St. Mary's may attempt to get by one-on-one against Drew with Saxon, it might work. It also might not work. And if it doesn't work and they end up needing to send some double teams, the shooters need to be ready. And that's not just Julian. It's Rasir Bolton. It's Malachi Smith coming off the bench. It's Nolan Hickman, like you mentioned. It's Ben Gregg to an extent. Like, you need everybody to be stepping up and having a big role. I think secondary shooters outside of Drew Timme is the biggest story. I also think Anton Watson is going to be monumentally important for Gonzaga in this game, primarily on the defensive end of the floor. That's always where he's kind of been active. He's a high pressure guy. He can kind of has the ability to get St. Mary's players out of their rhythm a little bit. And like I said, if St. Mary's is in rhythm, if they're doing what they want to do with the basketball, I honestly think there's a very, very little chance that Gonzaga can win in that circumstance. So they need to get St. Mary's out of their rhythm. The two players most equipped to do that defensively are Anton Watson and Hunter Salas coming off the bench. If they can have good performances defensively, I don't care if those two guys combine to score 0 points. If they have a huge impact offensive or defensively, I think that could sway the tide. But of course, offensively, it's going to come down to what Drew can do down on the block.
Right. And we talk about Drew, and it does seem like there needs to be the number 2, like kind of like a new villain in the chapter of these St. Mary's Gonzaga of these games. And I threw the tweet out there, and I think there's gotten a lot of great responses on the idea of who has been some of the greater villains in this rivalry between St. Mary's and Gonzaga. Andy, who's kind of like one of the guys who kind of stands out to you has been like the villain to Gonzaga from these St. Mary's teams? And then like maybe your perspective of like who's been like that guy for St. Mary's. I mean, like I go way back all the way. Like I'm Adam Morrison is the first one that pops in my head. But who is it for you, and who comes to mind?
It's Omar Samhan. It's clearly, to me, it's Omar Samhan. And I wonder if that is related to my time at Gonzaga, because my freshman year in Spokane was his senior year. It was junior or senior year. I can't remember. But either way, like he had been in college enough to, when I got there, everybody was like, this is the guy we hate. Like, we were educated on like, this is the dude. You know, he had said some stuff to Mark Few. He was upset he hadn't gotten recruited there. He had killed them for a couple of years. And then, of course, I think it was his senior year, because that was Dellavedova's freshman year. And so there was this kind of seamless transition of like, we hate Omar Samhan. And then after my freshman year, oh, he's gone. Okay, who are we going to hate now? And it's like, oh, that kid with the funny mouth guard who killed us as a freshman, that's going to be the dude. And to Delly's credit, he loved it. He loved it. He loved it. He loved it. You could tell. And that's what made him fun. Like, there's other guys. Mickey McConnell obviously comes to mind. And there's Rob Jones comes to mind a little bit. There's a few other kind of villainous guys, but Omar Samhan and Matthew Dellavedova are kind of number 1 and number 1A in terms of hate. There's guys after that I kind of disliked in a way. Like I didn't hate Emmett Nahr, even though he was really good. I didn't hate Jordan Ford, even though he was very good. But Delhi and Samhan were distinctly dislikable in a way that I think you need in a rivalry like this one.
Yeah, and I think that's true. It's like it's kind of like the one like in your gut of like when you see their picture, you see their face, you're like just like ugh. It's like I
feel it.
Like, I can't stand this guy. And I mean, I think similarly to the point of like you talk about like the mouth guard, the hair, and everything that Delhi kind of like brought in. I feel like that was me with Adam Morrison, like because I like my freshman year, I think was his sophomore year, so we were kind of like at least like a year or two separated from each other, and it's like every time it was like obviously like he was a killer in college and he was one of the best in the country, and one of the few times like we got to actually rush the court with them in the building, it's like it was really sweet. Like the Josh Heifelds kind of come up to mind, the Derek Rivios also come back to mind. But even like of recent note, I saw a lot of Gaels fans were pointing out Kelly Olynyk. Kelly Olynyk, great pull. Like obviously, like he's going to be on there because he just killed us. I mean, killed everybody. But all right, but now look, I'm starting to like look at this and think about just the way this is going to play out, and just like we talked about some of the matchups. So one of the things that's going to be coming up this week, and kind of wanted to get your take because I feel like these two schools have been almost like so connected at the hip for so long in a number of ways, whether it be the fact that they're the two mid-majors who are doing what they do, the fact that they're both small schools, all these things. But as the numbers are coming up, Randy Bennett is going to pick up win number 500 at some point over the next couple of weeks. And he's going to be one of 30 along with Mark Few to all time to actually have 500 wins at the same school. And just thinking about that and just like the added fuel to this rivalry and how much like both like Randy and Mark have meant to the institutions. Just can you kind of like paint the picture of just like adding that to the rivalry as well? Just these two coaches and what they have meant to their schools.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I think Mark Few and the Gonzaga story has never been replicated. And there's a decent chance that it will truly never be replicated in the sense of starting from truly, I don't want to say nothing, but starting from a very, very small place to ascend to where they have been. But like St. Mary's has followed that trajectory just kind of a few years behind in a pretty significant way. And, a very small institution. I think they have less students than Gonzaga, if I'm not mistaken. It's a comparable amount at least. And
we're the smallest in the WCC.
That's not surprising to me at all. Yeah. And so I think the continuity is such an interesting facet of this. I don't know specifically with Randy, although I imagine it's similar. Like Mark was getting job offers 4 or 5 years into his tenure that were significant. There's rumors that Indiana called him. There's rumors that Oregon called. I mean, those aren't rumors, they're facts that Oregon called him. Like many, many, many other programs have called him. And he, at this point now, they're not calling anymore. It doesn't matter anymore. Like if Calipari does leave Kentucky, I doubt they're even going to call because it's just not worth it. And Randy, to do something similar, when you look at all the other programs in the conference and they're not having that level of continuity. San Francisco has rattled off a handful of very, very good coaches, but Kyle Smith went to Washington State. Todd Golden just went to Florida, and who knows how long a school like Portland can hold on to a Shante Leggins. Like, you don't see that very often. And for programs like these mid-major programs, these small schools, especially on the West Coast where you don't tend to get as much national attention, for them to have built juggernauts in the way that they have and to be rivals and to be in the same conference. I mean, it's a fantastic story. It's a story that most people, when they think about college basketball, they talk about Gonzaga and St. Mary's. They don't talk about that element of it. They kind of, for Gonzaga, they get bagged all the time for the level of their conference, which is, a shot at St. Mary's that is undeserved. And for St. Mary's, they're still even ascending to the point where they get haters. Quite honestly, I'm not sure they've gotten all the way there yet. But I just right before we jumped on, I looked at bracketology, and it's like St. Mary's is better by every advanced analytical metric than Gonzaga, and they're better than a whole bunch of other teams. And I saw them as a 5 seed on a recent bracketology, which is the highest I've seen them. And it's like Gonzaga's the 3. And yeah, Gonzaga's played Alabama and they've played other teams, but St. Mary's played Houston. I know they didn't win that game, but they played them. They beat Oral Roberts. Like they have some really nice wins on their resume. The Washington loss, the Colorado State loss are hurting them. And they would hurt Gonzaga too. That's just how it is. But I think that seeing these two programs and these two coaches be able to build at a school like this consecutively at the same time while having this rivalry is a fantastic story in college basketball that I wish more people would appreciate.
Right. And maybe that story will be told someday in a larger way, just the connection between these two, and just how, like, to your point of like that, because Gonzaga had like about probably like a 5-6 year jump on St. Mary's when it came to that, because the first run was 97, 98 for the Zags, and St. Mary's Randy didn't show up, I think, until the 01-02, and they were coming off a season where they won all of 2 games. Mark Few took over a program that actually was already established, or at least like was winning. Like St. Mary's started with 2 wins. That's what they had the year before Randy arrived. And but just like the level what these two programs have been able to accomplish, that's what makes the rivalry so special. It's what makes we're going to see on Saturday so fun. We know that this building is going to be packed. Like both buildings like know how to rock in general. Like, but when they get together, it just ratchets it up another notch. Talking about like one of the things like I always kind of think about is what's a moment from the rivalry that sticks out in your mind? Maybe a time in the kennel when you were still a student, or like what's something that like jumps out as like the moment that you'll always remember?
Well, it's the Mickey McConnell shot. That's what it is. I was at the kennel for that game, and that was 39 minutes of feeling like we were going to win. It was never easy. It never was the St. Mary's was in that game the entire game. But then for Mickey McConnell to hit that shot, it's rare, very rare to have the air just completely sucked out of the kennel. It does not happen often. And in an environment like that, where that place was rocking there was earth seismic levels in Spokane for about 2 hours, and then just you could hear a pin drop as soon as that shot went down. And I remember St. Mary's players were, as you do, they were hooting and hollering, they were yelling on the court, they were waving at the kennel, they were waving at us, and it just fueled hatred for so many people. That was the moment that people were like, oh, I get why we don't just like, oh, we don't like that school. I get why people hate that school. I get it. And it was a hell of a shot. It was a fantastic, Gonzaga doesn't lose like that very often. I know, I thought of that play. I thought of that game when I saw what Julian Strother did to BYU, what Aiden Mahaney did to BYU, because I know how those students feel, because that's what we felt. And I know that Gonzaga has done it to St. Mary's. They did it in a WCC tournament to them. And so that's the moment that really sticks out. I don't remember who it was on, but I remember a WCC tournament. I think it must have been 2013, where Kelly Olynyk just dunked all over. It might have been Rob Jones. It might have been one of the other bigs for them. I don't remember, but just threw down an absolute monster dunk that got Gonzaga South at the Orleans Arena absolutely popping. So those are the two moments that distinctly stand out to me. One for heartbreak and one for the opposite reason.
Yeah, it'll be amazing. It's going to be fun. I think one of the moments that stands out to me, and it kind of like to an extent, it actually kind of like aligns with, as we talked about Omar Samhan earlier, was that 2010, but in Vegas. I would take it to Vegas, and just the final like 5-10 minutes of that ball game when St. Mary's actually won their first tournament title under Randy Bennett and went to the tournament with that team. And just, I was in the band at that point. So like I'm sitting on the sideline and we are just losing our collective minds during the entire final minutes of that one, because it was one of the first time St. Mary's ran away with a game against the Zags. And it, like, we knew it was just a matter of like when the clock's hitting 0 and all that. But this is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be great. I know like there's always going to be a good number of Zags in the building. They always figure out a way to sneak into McEwen and fill that place up. It always like hours and hours, like to your point, probably the same at the kennel. It's going to be just rocking all day long. It's going to be a party from start to finish. And I'm really looking forward to it. So just like before we wrap it up, before I let you go, what's your call? Who's going to actually pick up the W on Saturday?
I was a little nervous you were going to ask me this. In Moraga, with the way Gonzaga's played, and there's I'm curious how they do against Santa Clara. Obviously, I'm curious how St. Mary's does against San Francisco, and that could change my pick a little bit. Hopefully, there's no injuries or anything like that, obviously.
Right.
But right now, I would probably lean St. Mary's, and I'd probably lean St. Mary's by multiple possessions, 9, 10, 15 points, something like, maybe not 15. I don't know if I want that out on the record, but like 8 to 10 points for St. Mary's, I think is possible. It'll be interesting. Of course, Gonzaga has one of the better offenses that St. Mary's has faced all year long, but that hasn't seemed to slow them down much this year. So I think there's a reasonable chance St. Mary's, maybe not a wire-to-wire win, but gets up by 4 or 5 possessions and maintains that for the rest of the game.
Hey, you never know. Maybe like that'll be the bulletin board material in the Zags locker room. Like, that they like, all right, like they heard the prediction, and it might motivate them. You never know. All right. Thanks, Andy, for hopping on. It's always great talking with you, and we'll catch up later.
Absolutely.
All right. I want to thank Andy one more time for hopping on. Man, this game is always going to be so hard to pick, and maybe I'm just going to go back to the way I was looking at this maybe about a week ago, because I don't think a ton has actually changed in the way St. Mary's is playing and the way Gonzaga is playing. So I was starting to look at this matchup and starting to think like St. Mary's is in the driver's seat. They are the ones who are kind of in control of their own destiny to win their first regular season title in a long time, and then to put themselves in position to be the 1 seed in Vegas. And this St. Mary's team just seems so focused, so on top of what they are doing, that I would pick St. Mary's to win this first matchup. I think that's the way these teams are trending. I think that's the way that this is probably going to play out for Saturday, so long as everyone's healthy between now and then. St. Mary's has been playing so well defensively. I think this is going to cause a lot of problems for Gonzaga, because now you absolutely have to find a second option from Drew Timme. And there is no guarantee that is going to happen. There's no guarantee that Gonzaga is going to be able to pull another rabbit out of their hat like they did against so many of the other WCC teams. Really, because thinking about it, is that they had to do that against Santa Clara. They had to do it against USF. They had to do it against BYU. They kind of had to do it against Pacific. And St. Mary's is obviously clearly better than all of those teams. And I don't expect Gonzaga to be able to sneak away like they did in those games. I will say this, though. This is not to say that they're going to be playing these up-pace, high-scoring games on Saturday, because that's not what's going to happen. I expect this game to be played in the 60s and the low 70s. I expect Gonzaga still to be able to make a little bit of a run throughout the course of this game. I don't expect St. Mary's to run away from the Zags, but just based on what we have seen both of these teams do to this point in the season, St. Mary's just seems like the better bet, and that they should be the favorite going into Saturday. All right, and as we start to kind of like wrap up, we're going to take a look. Let's take a look at a few of the games I think are going to be key for the standings and where everybody is at this point in the season. So a couple of Thursday matchups, I think they're going to be really good. You have LMU at BYU. LMU won the first matchup down in LA, so this is an opportunity for the Lions to complete the sweep, and probably what is the last time they're going to be in Provo for a while. This BYU team, again, like they have not lost by much to anybody, so I expect this to be a close game. I expect LMU to come out with the same level of intensity that they had against Gonzaga. I think that the experience that they had in the kennel is going to serve them well in Provo and at the Marriott Center. So I expect that one to just be a really good, tough matchup. I think this is a coin flip between these two, but we'll see how it goes. Also Thursday, USF at St. Mary's. USF has not been able to pick up very many wins against the Gaels over the last, let's say, 10 years. This has largely been a lopsided affair, but usually between these two. And St. Mary's played really well up at the Hilltop just a few weeks ago. I would largely expect that to be the case again. On Thursday. St. Mary's plays incredible 3-point defense. This is something that USF has been doing really well, is shooting from three. And no one has shot well from three against St. Mary's to this point in the season. So I would not expect USF to be able to shoot 48% from three in this one. They're going to be down closer to like mid 30s. So I think it's going to be a really fun matchup, but I think that's still St. Mary's game. And Saturday, we have St. Mary's and Gonzaga, but then also Santa Clara is at USF. I think that's another one where you really have to kind of watch out for what's gonna happen in that one. Like Santa Clara was able to snap their 5-game losing streak to USF just a couple weeks ago, so we'll see if Santa Clara can actually get their first sweep against the Dons in a while. And that'll just about wrap it up. So again, I want to thank Andy Patton and Beau Levesque for hopping on and talking about the St. Mary's Gonzaga rivalry. The first game between the two teams is this Saturday in Moraga. It's going to be really fun. I'll be out there hoping to see like a good number of you who are also going to be able to like get in the building. Be sure to get there early if you're going. Like if you have not been to a Gonzaga St. Mary's game before at the pavilion, you better get there early, especially if you have GA tickets. The second that door opens, you better get in to find a spot. Otherwise, you're going to end up somewhere standing on the back wall. Anyone who's been there also knows, like, dress in layers, bring the jacket for outside when it's still about 50 degrees. But then once you get in, it's going to be a oven in there. The AC is going to only help a little bit. So also be prepared for that. And then with that, I'll just wrap it up. Be sure to subscribe on the YouTube channel. Be sure to like and share it on the podcast on your favorite streaming services. Follow me on Twitter and on TikTok at Posts by Zach. And with that, I'll get out of here. Have a good week, and I'll catch you later.